But that same one sunset that is happening right now is seen differently from different angles, from different positions on the earth, and is never repeated ever. It's almost as if each one of us experiencing the universe at each moment is uniquely experiencing it, never to be ever repeated. Such is the enormous beauty and diversity and richness of the one divine consciousness that unfolds. If the one divine consciousness is one indivisible, which is all. If it is one and it is indivisible, how can it ever represent itself? How can it ever manifest in this innumerable richness and diversity? Because it cannot be divided, remember? This man could see, although his physical eyes were damaged, he could see everything normally, except when he got angry. When he was upset, he became blind. So the disturbance of energy clouded the perception, but the perception was always there. And you will find this interestingly in the yoga tradition. They speak of 5 bodies. The Annamaya, material, Pranamaya, which is life force body, Manomaya, which is the mind consciousness body, and then above that 2 more, which are the Vijnanamaya, which is described wrongly today as intelligence. It's actually the supramental consciousness, the divine intelligence, the divine creative power that we spoke of before. And then the 5th body is the Anandamaya, the bliss body. Again, wrongly described today and reduced to a sensory, sensational happiness or such.
So a very warm welcome to our speaker of the day, Shraddhalu Ranade-ji. Shraddhalu Ranade is a scientist, educationist, and scholar. He's presently involved in various activities, including video productions, teacher training programs, and software development. A multifaceted personality, he delivers talks and conducts workshops on numerous themes, including integral education, management, self-development, Indian culture, science and spirituality, and yoga. And this morning, he is going to talk to us about the Pancha Mahabhuta, the great 5 elements, in the light of Sri Aurobindo.
The theme for these series of talks of the Shakti Kumbha is around numbers and their deeper psycho-spiritual significance, but intended to activate their powers in us. And so, before we come to 5, I would like to give a sense of what that really means. Because a number in itself, to us, means nothing. What is 5? What is 4? You have to have 5 of something, 4 of something. So you can have 4 apples or 5 oranges. Or as you can see in the images here, something which is of 3 or 4 or 5. The mother observes numbers like music belong properly to the domain of the mental worlds. It's an idea, as if an essential concept. And in that concept, you can have numerous forms. But if something exists essentially in the mental world, it must have a deeper origin. Otherwise, it could not have formed in the mental world, isn't it? But in order to be able to understand that deeper sense, one has to as if rise above mind into an experience of the thing itself. Sri Aurobindo calls a real idea, a power of the supramental consciousness. But what we could do is to observe how or where or when in creation one first finds the essentiality of the number as an inevitable essential character. And then from there one can get a glimpse of how that number has a meaning on all planes and why it has an identity as an abstract idea in the mental world. And then of course in the physical world innumerably represented. As an example, taking some of the symbols already used here, number 1 obviously is the one origin. There can be no other. But 1 is not true. Everywhere we see so many things. Where is the 1? You don't see oneness. So the way the mind structures it, combine it all and the whole is the 1. Yes, that's one way of talking about it or perceiving it. Sri Aurobindo observes that the divine oneness is not numerical oneness but oneness in identity. Meaning, take any object and millions of objects, each is essentially the same one. That's the deeper sense of the oneness in identity. All is the same origin, all is the same one divine expressing itself innumerably, infinitely. That one is not a monotone oneness limited to singularity of a numerical quantity. It is oneness infinitely rich, unendingly unfolding, never repeating itself, and yet always one and the same. Such being the nature of the divine consciousness, naturally the one world that flows out of it is unendingly unfolding and never ever repeating itself. If you take it at a very material level, watch a sunset or a sunrise, it is so beautiful, and yet it is never repeated. Not only never repeated in a moment, as you watch it from one moment to the next, it has changed. Our mind is not capable of recognizing that, but take a photo, close your eyes, take another photo, and you'll find the difference already visible. But that same one sunset that is happening right now is seen differently from different angles, from different positions on the earth, and is never repeated ever. It's almost as if each one of us experiencing the universe at each moment is uniquely experiencing it, never to be ever repeated. Such is the enormous beauty and diversity and richness of the one divine consciousness that unfolds. But in order to be able to unfold, it needs to take two poises, one which is its expressive power and the other which is its witnessing experience. You need to watch the sunset for the sunset to be appreciated. And so the same divine consciousness takes as if two poises, one within you and one which is playing out. Or you are actually a representation of a deeper truth, which is the same divine consciousness providing a base, unchanging, immutable. Through all this enormous multiplicity unfolding, something must remain against which it is experienced. And we may use the analogy of a canvas and a painting. If there is not a canvas, there is not a substance or basis for the painting to exist, isn't it? But if the canvas is fluid or has holes or limits, then your painting is bounded, distorted, limited. But if the canvas can be absolutely unchanging, infinite, eternally, upon that, the full power of an infinite creative energy can play out freely all possible colors. If the canvas moves with the brush, you cannot have a drawing. But if the canvas is rock steady, the brush can play out to the full intensity of the violence of an entire universe created or extinguished in an instant. Such is the power of the Devi, the divine creative energy of the Divine Mother, that she creates universes and extinguishes them in an instant. Against this backdrop of Shiva, or the presiding consciousness that remains unchanging, supporting. But it is the same consciousness which moves to manifest, or the same manifesting power that comes back to rest. There is always one. But taking a dual poise makes possible the manifestation. So you see where two becomes relevant. At a level so essential in creation that eventually everything in creation you will find splits into a duality of these two poises in every way, including within us. We have a poise of consciousness that stands back as if witnessing, and a poise of consciousness that moves to flow to manifest. But we are both. One is the origin of the other comes back to rest in the one, and you keep moving between these two poises, isn't it? Or soul and nature, and other ways in which this duality is articulated. They all become now a way to recognize and understand the sense of two. But then there is also the three. And the three, interestingly, in this unfolding of the manifestation, you find naturally the perception of three, inevitably, at such an essential level that you cannot ignore it. Because all that has already been expressed is held in the moment of the now, which builds the present expression, which looks forward to the unending possibilities yet to unfold. And so you have as if three stations or three poises of that which has been, that which will be, and where we are today, which is formed of that which has been, or is the result of that, but looks towards that which must be. And so three poises which would be perhaps represented in a more mental way as past, present, or future. But that's not really the truth. The truth is there is only one consciousness which holds infinitely all possibilities, unendingly. And it only in its sense of unfolding that there is a psychological sense of a past or a present or a future. But all is simultaneous in the oneness. All possibilities of future are held. All, not just the past which happened, but all possibilities of what could have been are also equally, simultaneously held. Without ever losing the one, there is therefore a triple movement. The three also becomes the basis for the three gunas, the modes of nature. When nature forms things, how does she form them? And when we go deep into the infinity of richness, of variety, we find underlying them all is a triple poise of working of nature's energy. If you can catch these three, out of these three, you can generate all the infinity. And this is quite an extraordinary concept which is discovered by the great rishis through a long period, Sri Aurobindo says, a long period of introspection and understanding. And I will just present it to you in this way. When energy moves, when energy acts, and when energy plays with itself, with herself, there are only three ways in which she can essentially interact. So, energy comes against energy. When the first pressure comes, it can resist. That is one relationship of resistance. Or, when energy presses against energy, she can push back. That is the second relation. Or, when energy comes against energy, they can play together in a harmony. And there is no other. All other possible combinations of energy playing with energy is a variation, a mix of these three. Tamas, Rajas, and Sattva. And it's a fascinating insight and such a powerful, deep insight that all of nature's processes can be as if understood in terms of these three. And this is such a powerful, essential cosmic truth that you will find this reflected in every way, on all planes, in all ways, wherever energy works to manifest. And you'll find this, of course, described in the Ayurveda as the types of your temperament, of your nature, types of food, effects of food, characteristics of different substances. Everything can be discussed in terms of these three or their combinations. And what is interesting also, we see, if this is true on a macroscopic level, a food, for example, a vegetable is rajasic, its effect at a molecular level would be rajasic, to stimulate, to activate. So at a macro level, when there is a guna operative, it also operates at a micro level. This is the only basis upon which a science of nutrition or a science of nature or mastering nature can be built up. And this was the basis of the yogic knowledge. And you see here the essentiality of the sense of three. What we find, though, as we move up the numbers, not all numbers have an underlying essentiality which is distinctive. Sometimes they also represent combinations of things. For example, the 6 you can see is the rising triangle and the descending triangle. I did not touch upon 3. There are many other aspects to how this 3 works. If 3 becomes the basis for the Sattva, Rajas, Tamas, but also it is the only way by which, by a support of 3 points, you can have a stable external form. A triangle is the most essential stable structure. Why? It comes back to this essentiality of the 3. That's why I said these are essentially supramental concepts which, brought down into a mental content like a container, can hold so many variations of forms. But you see, you get a sense of the essentiality. And the same with the 4 and the 5. 6 being more of a combination of 2 3s. 7 becomes again an essentiality, because 7 essential principles are needed to form cosmos. Take out any one of them and you will have chaos. You do not need an 8th, because all else can be built around these 7. What those 7 are become then the basis for 7 planes of consciousness. All are within each. Just as in the three gunas, you will never find one of the gunas in isolation. All are always represented together in different mixes or blends. And so we come to the question of the five, which is the real theme for today. But with this background, you'll appreciate better what this five represents and understand it perhaps more deeply. The sense of five Pancha Mahabhuta, five great elements or elemental states, the English translation does not do justice to the Sanskrit vocabulary. Maha, great, but not just great, it's vast, large, infinite in action. Mahas is the Vedic term for the supramental creative power by which the divine conceives the universe and manifests itself as the whole. But as a creative power, it is the same knowledge power that is simultaneously present in all things, knows the whole from the perspective of everything at the same time, and moves simultaneously in a blissful, creative, rich power and action. Such is the nature of the sense of Mahas, vast. So when you bring it to the English vocabulary, you can see how much is lost. But bhuta, bha itself, you will find the ba being the root, ha being a force. The ba is in a movement creative in the lips, for example. A compression, you can't do ba without a compression of force. Can you feel it? Can you hear it? The power, not yet manifest, but building up intensity, and then when the intensity builds sufficiently, unable to contain beyond a point, b. And h is the force of what rushes through. So b. You'll find the same b, Brahman. The h is there, but before the h there's the r. The rhythming out of the power as it flows into creation. Brahman is the word used to describe the one that is the all, the totality of the cosmos in oneness as it bursts into manifestation. That's why Brahma is the deity of creation. But you see, that's how the mind reduces it. The bhutani are the beingness, the coming into being, the vast unfolding into becoming of that which is being. But why are they five? And here we find an insight, an understanding of this, which I have not found anywhere else other than in Sri Aurobindo. I've gone through pretty much all traditions, with going back always to these essentialities. Most will say there are five, and that's it. Why? That's how it is. But that does not satisfy our mind. We need to go deeper to something. And you find Sri Aurobindo explains why and how, and what they truly represent. It's not enough to say, oh, five elements. There is ether, air, fire, water, earth. Why? Or you go to the Chinese system, they will use terms such as wood or metal somewhere. What does that even mean? It means nothing. Why is it? You mean if you put fire and water together, you're creating an element? Fire itself is made of so many things burning. Water is made of H2O. How do you call them essential elements? And all this misunderstanding, wrong understanding, comes because we have caught a certain form of articulation and not gone to the essence. And the essence I found described only in Sri Aurobindo. And he explains it in this way. I will articulate in my own words, but you will get the sense of it. If the one divine consciousness is one indivisible, which is all, if it is one and it is indivisible, how can it ever represent itself? How can it ever manifest in this innumerable richness and diversity? Because it cannot be divided, remember? It's a miracle that the world can exist the way it exists, coming from something which is indivisibly one, isn't it? Would you agree it's a miracle? How does the one then execute that miracle to divide itself, or at least give an appearance of having divided itself? Try to imagine a consciousness which is indivisibly one. How can it ever create that? It cannot. Unless, and this is the process that it uses, and this is the brilliance of the understanding, it never ever divides itself. It goes through 5 stages of self-modification, so to say, which lead eventually to the appearance of divided forms. And those 5 stages of self-modification are what are called the 5 elemental states. And they're elemental because they're so essential. Without them, there could not be anything in a becoming from the being. So I will describe them in these ways. Let's conceive of, and because we have to necessarily bring it down to a level tangible enough to our mental conception, conceive of the first state of the one consciousness, indivisible. The divine knows itself utterly, and there is nothing else other than itself, its own consciousness, which is existing and blissfully. There is none other. There is no multiplicity, there is only that. Dwelling in it, it can dwell upon all the things that it could be. And it can dwell in its blissfulness on all that it can ever be, but held in unmanifest state. It dwells in itself like a writer broods on the beautiful novel that she might express. Dwell on all possibilities. At that moment, nothing is particularly articulated. Everything is possible. I'm free to do anything, be anything. And then as it dwells on that, it can dwell on some more than others. Oh, it could be a romantic novel, it could be an adventure novel, or it could be a blend of these two, or it could be completely a detective novel. All possibilities, and then it dwells on one aspect or other. Perhaps this, perhaps that, or moving from this into that. And you see, there is a possibility, without ever splitting or dividing, of dwelling on one and then on another and moving between them, which we may describe at an essential level as the consciousness concentrating, compressing, or diffusing and expanding. And the characteristic of this first poise of consciousness, we will call it the etheric, is expansion, contraction, and rhythming out, as if creating in consciousness the sense of ripples or waves. But waves, there is nothing other. There is only a movement of consciousness dwelling in itself. So, still no form. But then something interesting happens. Because there is no time nor space so far, all possible ways of rippling, rhythming are simultaneously present. And it can dwell on one particular rhythming and another particular rhythming, and the rhythmings can then blend or touch, interact with each other. One ripple blends or touches another. And this becomes the second elemental state that we call air. And I'll explain to you why it is called air as we go along, because Sri Aurobindo describes this. And you will see the profundity of the ancient insight and the knowledge. So here in this air principle, what happens is rhythms of expansion, contraction meet rhythms of expansion and contraction. And as they meet, they form resonances. And you've probably seen this in physics. When two waves combine, they create troughs and peaks. There is an interference pattern, we say, in physics. But the interference pattern itself is appearing and disappearing, joining, separating. And remember, it's not just two waves, an infinity of richness of waves playing together, creating all kinds of interference patterns that appear and disappear. But the characteristic of these joining of waves is they collide, or they experience pressure against each other. And I'll give you this as an example, again, reducing to a material level. If you have a pulsating, let's say, drum, okay, a drum shaking at a frequency, just for arbitrarily say 100 times per second. I bring another drum which is vibrating at 105 times per second. The waves will pass each other. But difference between the two of 5 pulses per second, you will hear as a sound, as the combination. Okay. Now, as this frequency is brought to 100, that will become slower until it joins. And now as if the two sounds join. And the moment they join, here's the interesting part. If you pull one drum away, the blend of these two waves joining will pull the other drum. It literally transfers pressure from one side to the other. You push this drum, it'll push the other. They are as if locked into each other. They are as if touching, holding each other. Although nothing was ever moved, there is no force to hold, and yet it's holding, joining as if becoming one. Pressure, touch becomes the characteristic of the air principle. By the play of combinations of vibrations dwelling on itself, pressure, is created. Touch becomes the basis. And why do we call this the air principle? Sri Aurobindo explains, because of all things that exist in the universe at a human experiential level, air has the characteristic closest to this principle. Because air flows and touches you, but you cannot see it, you cannot smell it, you cannot hold it, you cannot grasp it, it has no solidity. It has no existence other than the sensation of the touch that you feel, isn't it? You blow the air, you feel the touch, that's it. You never saw anything. And associated is to the ether principle is the sound characteristic because of the resonance, the vibration of the play, the waves. That's the characteristic of sound. You hear the vibration, but there is no touch even. So from pure sound, where you hear, there is something, to the touch, which is the air principle, we move now to the next degree of self-modification. The same consciousness, remember, is playing this game through layers, so to say. Now, when you have two kinds of touch, or many kinds of touch combining, and the touch itself joining together, what do you find? The appearance of form. A form seen, perceived in various ways, but in itself insubstantial. Your hand could pass right through it, and yet there is the vividness of a form. That is the characteristic of the third self-modification. It exists, it has a form, it has distinctiveness, multidimensionality, but it can pass, it can appear, it could disappear. It is unstable, it is semi-transparent perhaps, or to the touch, your hand could pass through it to a rigid hand. And therefore, on the material world, the closest equivalent experience that we have of such a thing is in fire. When fire burns, what do you see? You see a distinctive form. You can pass your hand right through it, isn't it? And yet it is there. It is as if luminous. And there is, of course, a deeper aspect to it. The physical fire becomes the representation of it, but Agni is also, at this level, the primary operating principle in the Vedic symbolism. Agni is the force of the will which is the creator of forms. And there are three modes of operation of Agni, which is if you had to translate in the physical terms, three fires. The chemical fire, there is the electric fire, and the atomic fire. In all three, we'll see the common operation of Agni. What happens in a chemical fire? Molecules combine and join to create new materials. The fire burns, well, what do we say? Oxygen combines with hydrogen and creates water. Or something else combines with something, creates something else. That's the chemical fire. There is the electric fire, where it is not molecules joining, it is atoms joining by sharing their electrons on the periphery. And it is this electric fire which is the basis for so many kinds of phenomena, including the lightning and such other. It is also the basis by which molecules are formed, which becomes the basis for molecular fires. Go still deeper. You go into subatomic fire, interactions inside the atom which create the atom, and therefore it's called the solar fire in the Veda. So you have the solar fire, electric fire, and the chemical fire, the three Agnis, so to say. But you see how a deep truth can be observed in its operation in nature, and yet held at its more essential level within us is the one Agni, the intensity of the will concentrated, turning to a purpose and unfolding, driving, creating forms. The forms are still unstable though. They appear, we see them. Even in a vision, we can vision them. And even that is working of Agni. But now we want to concretize, stabilize. So from the third principle, the 5 elements, we move to one more degree of self-modification. And here Sri Aurobindo describes this as the principle by which, let's say, two forms enter into a relationship by which they stick to each other. And the stickiness of the forms makes for the possibility of the forms now to exist in large combinations, but because they're sticky and not rigid, they can flow. And so this density which is felt, a kind of a stability, not yet stable in the form itself, but a stability in the substantiality of moving forms, And the closest equivalent experience we have in the physical world is of water flowing. So you watch a river flowing. You've all seen this. If you were in last year's Shakti Kumbh at Rishikesh, you would have seen as the Ganga flows, suddenly there is a rise and the water flows. But all the water that comes after also rises on the same spot and flows on. And all the rest that comes rises on the same spot and flows. The water is constantly changing. And yet there is the stability of some kind of a form, some kind of a wave shape. And if you try to understand why is it rising only in this part and not elsewhere, look inside the water. Inside is a stone. And the flow of the water somehow hitting the stone is as if pushed up and creates this rising wave, and the water flows on. But the rising bump, the hump of the water is as if semi-permanent, representing an underlying potential now manifest in the flow of the water. You can get a sense of what this represents. Or you look at the sea waves. While you're here, go to the beach, watch the waves. And you'll find one after another the waves coming. Each one is different, but keep on staring, and in a short while you'll realize they're all unique, they're all distinctive, and yet it is the same rhythm that repeats itself. The rhythm of the ocean that keeps wave after wave, isn't it? So here you find the sense of a first appearance of what might become stable rigidity, but rather it is stable fluidity at this moment. And then comes a fifth modifier of consciousness, where now within the consciousness, what was this fluidity? There is the infusion or the emergence of rigidness of combination. And then for the first time, you have an object which is hard. You can hit it. And it has a wave. The sound is a wave. It has a certain plasticity. It resonates, creates, in the point where it hits, there's perhaps a spark. There is the sound and there is the touch. All the five elements are felt. But the fifth element is the most strong, making for its rigidity. If at this point, by an application of the fire principle, you heat this metal, you will find the fire principle increasing in its content has affected the rigidity principle, and now I could simply bend it. Heated to 500 degrees perhaps, I could simply bend this and it would be malleable, almost like water, but not quite. And it's the fire principle which did it. The touch at that point would have a different character, not this hard touch, but a softer touch. At that point with another piece of metal, because my hand would probably burn, I can push this and shape it by the pressure of touch. And the ring of it, the sound of it would be quite different. So what we recognize is in any object, any form, any substance, you have all five elemental principles operative, but the particular combination of how these five are gathered in them makes for the distinctive quality that it expresses. And this, now you see, is the means by which the one indivisible consciousness, modifying itself in its relation with itself, nothing ever happens which is other than it, simply dwelling on itself in layers phenomenally, in a sequence of self-modification, by the fifth stage becomes an appearance of rigid, distinct, separate forms. What an amazing miracle. And the five elemental states or the elemental operations of consciousness are the means by which it accomplishes this miracle. The entire world, therefore, is as if formed of the same one consciousness undergoing five kinds of self-modification, and the combination of those five makes for this characteristics of the substance. So this becomes the basis for an entire science, you might say. Isn't it? So just to come back to the analogy, the third being the fire, it is also in the five senses the basis for vision, light. The fourth is the basis for smell, and the fifth is the basis for taste. Now, it's mapped to five elements, five senses mapped to five elements. Again, you will find the deep truth of this. In the ancient traditions or in all the books you will read, they'll just say, this corresponds to that. But why? No explanation, except in Sri Aurobindo. Once you understand this, you will see why. Let's put it another way. When you hear a sound, what is it that you're registering physically, biologically? Vibrations of the air and the eardrum which vibrates with it. Very simple. What is it? It's a touch. Air touching, but transferring vibration only. If you touch your finger, what is it finally? It is pressure again. What's the difference between pressure on the eardrum and pressure on the finger? When you look, you have light coming on your screen inside the eyeball. It is light touching. What is smell? It is the smell molecules touching, being absorbed. Touch. What is taste? Touch. So why call them 5 different senses? What you see different is which of these 5 elemental principles is dominant. And that's why we have 5 senses. We do not have 6 senses or 7 senses. Even if, and there are people who have spoken of other senses, they will say, for example, birds have the ability to sense the magnetic field of the earth, is a sense in a way. Yes, that's just a human way of saying it. The actual experience in the bird is a perception which should be registered visual or smell or taste or touch or sound. And there are no other. There are no other senses. That's the interesting thing. Any perception of a thing, including electric fields, magnetic fields, or other things which you might perceive, is interpreted through a combination of these 5. And sometimes they're a blend of the 5. Interestingly, when you look at a cloud, how do you describe it? Soft and fluffy. Did you touch it? No, you just saw visually. And yet you can feel its softness. So what we discover, all 5 senses are simultaneously in each other. The difference is only of the predominance of which of the 5 elements is operative in these 5 biologically organized senses. But at a psychological level, without the need of the biology, one would still have 5 senses. You step out of the physical body in your subtle body, in a near-death experience, in an out-of-body experience. You do not have an eardrum. You do not have eyes. You do not have the electrical nervous system to sense pressure. These are only external material organizational basis for the 5 senses. Your entire subtle body sees in all directions from all parts. You extend your hand, through your fingers you're seeing as clearly as through the place where your eyes would be, isn't it? Your eyesight will touch in the very gaze of what it sees. And as you observe a beautiful tree in its aura, you will hear its music, taste, smell, and have the full 5 sensory experience of it at a distance through the gaze only. So the reality actually is one underlying divine consciousness operating through as if 5 modes of relating to itself, but using these 5 self-modifications, giving the appearance of distinct, separate forms in a multiplicity. And this exists on all planes. Only in the physical biology you need to organize an organ to be able to experience it in this way, because this is the domain of form and rigidity of form. But in the subtle body, even that is not needed. In fact, because we are primarily spirit, secondarily mind, and only tertiarily body, the reality is our 5 senses operate even in our spiritual consciousness and can operate bypassing the biology. And so you have examples medically verified of people who can see without eyes. And there's this example which is very famous. I believe it was during the First World War, that was medically tested in France. The whole book came about it. This man could see, although his physical eyes were damaged. He could see everything normally, except when he got angry. When he was upset, he became blind. So the disturbance of energy clouded the perception, but the perception was always there. And this you know perhaps of people who train you, or you can train yourself to sense with your fingers. I met somebody only yesterday. He was describing how he had heard in one of our discussions that one can sense through fingers. He said, okay, let me test. So every day he would go to his cupboard, feel with his fingers, and try to distinguish the color of the clothes that he was picking. And he said for a few months it didn't happen, but he persisted. And after a few months, he could begin to sense. The sense got activated. And now, in complete darkness or with eyes closed, he can pick the right color that he wants, sense it. Or others who can actually take a book and pass their finger over it and read the text. Or see, taste, smell, touch anywhere directly, bypassing the physical biological senses. And it's not, once you understand the principle behind it, it's so obvious, it's so simple, it's inevitable, in fact. Why are we bound to our biology, we would ask? So you can see how the 5 elemental states map to the 5 senses, and there cannot be a 6th or 7th or other sense. Or in the yoga tradition, we will say there is only one sense. That is the consciousness perceiving. And that therefore is described as the 6th sense or the only sense. Mind is the 6th sense or mind is the only sense, depending on how one utilizes the vocabulary. So this is the broad sense that I wanted to bring of the underlying principle of the 5 elements. But then I want to take it to one further step of an example of how these 5 elemental principles need to operate in any situation where there is the creative movement. Because that's the basis in which the one undivided, indivisible becomes multiplicity. Anywhere you want to move from underlying oneness to multiplicity, you'll find yourself passing through these 5 stages of self-modification, or in a more material domain, bringing together of the 5 elements to make for the completeness of the creative process. Now, you can explain this in numerous examples within yourself, within your working of your body, within the working of a concept, of your mind, of a project. You'll find all these elements need to be brought together. But I will put it in a context which is perhaps more accessible to us, in what I would call the learning process. Or in a more conventional sense, they will say teaching process. But it's never teaching, because you can never teach something, you can only learn something. So in education, Sri Aurobindo makes this observation that nothing can be taught. That's the first principle of true teaching. Try to teach someone, but the person can learn. And your role can be to assist their learning process. In that sense, you can be a teacher. But you cannot teach without the other side being ready to learn or capable of learning. So the learning process itself, you will find inherently has a mix of these 5 elements coming together. And I'll put it in this way. And if you look at the analogy, the symbolism becomes quite obvious. First of all, you will find there is the... Okay, let me follow the sequence then. From below up, the earth. Earth is the student, the learner. The earth by itself is as if somewhat rigid or dry. You need the water to come into the earth. Now you'll see how the parallel is to planting of a grain in the farming cycle. You'll find the same things happening, but we'll describe one and you'll see the ripple in the other. So earth needs to be softened with the water coming in. And so the student, the receptive base, and there is at that point the assistance of the teacher, we might say, who creates that sufficient nourishment of the basis, softening it up, giving it an ability to become malleable to the touch of that shaping. Clay, we might use the analogy. And then, when the water has softened it sufficiently, the love of the teacher, you might say, there comes the action of the knowledge itself. And knowledge is quite independent of the teacher. A teacher might try to teach you something, but you might grasp far more than what the teacher could convey. Isn't that happening often to us? So it shows that the teacher at that point is at best a mirror reflecting a knowledge, the light, the fire, reflected. And if you are a good reflector, you don't need to know what you're teaching. You just become the link through which the knowledge itself transmits far more than you could even perhaps have known or been able to transmit. So the fire principle becomes the knowledge itself. The air touch becomes the means by which this transmission takes place, this interaction. And the ether principle is the environment in which it takes place. If the environment is not free, clear, open, lit up, bright, nothing meaningful can take place. So, in any creation, in any action, first set the environment right. The environment must be conducive to that which you seek to realize. I'm going to now jump across many images because that's one way to get the big picture. Look at the space when you are going to go farming. If the environment itself is not set right, it is poisonous, it is confused, it is chaotic, aggressive, you will not have a free flow of growth. Well, the same thing for the student. If there is not the openness and a freedom to play, including the freedom to make mistakes, you cannot really learn. It's an inherent truth of all education, of all learning, that you must have the freedom to make mistakes. So this wideness which comes with the ether principle, freedom. Into that, you have the air principle, very materially, the fresh air and openness, but the interaction, the exchange, free flow of experiments, of play. And of course, in farming, it is literally the physical air. Into that comes the knowledge itself. An environment can be imbued with knowledge or can be imbued with something totally different. I don't know if you have had this experience when you enter a school space. You can feel in the air whether there is a meaningful learning taking place or not. You look at today's cinema, Hollywood particularly, of a college space. Nowhere do you see knowledge. You see only people having all kinds of strange emotional excitations, attractions and repulsions and drama. The air, the environment is now filled with this, not with knowledge. You go into that space, you'll be sucked into the play of energies of emotions, pulling, pushing, and exciting. But when you enter knowledge space, your mind opens up and somehow it's easier to know, easier to learn. You've experienced this. There's a particular place in the Sri Aurobindo ashram, in the main building, there's a room which is called the reading room. And the mother put a special formation there which allows you to receive knowledge more easily. You take the same book, go into that space, sit and read, and you'll find that the download is much more complete. Interesting. And such can be the space created where knowledge is this thriving presence, dominating influence. But of course, knowledge is also that thing, the fire principle, which is, because of the nature of the fire, lighting up, purifying, transforming the student. Having gone through the process of learning, of knowledge, you are not the same person. Fire has recast you, reshaped you into something more. The water, which was initially there to assist, after the fire's action, entirely is evaporated. There is nothing left of the teacher's support. The student is now baked into the new form, isn't it? So you see these very interesting analogies and symbolisms involved in the soul play. Ignore any one of these 5 elements, and the education will be either incomplete or ineffective or very laborious and difficult. Look at the same pattern of 5 in planting a seed in the field. Take out one of these 5 and you'll find the seed will not sprout, or the tree will be stunted or distorted, etc. Well, within us, the same 5 elemental principles are operative. And it's a way of looking at it that we are not just the biology, we are equally subtle bodies of various degrees or gradations. And you will find this, interestingly, in the yoga tradition. They speak of 5 bodies. The Annamaya, material, Pranamaya, which is life force body, Manomaya, which is a mind consciousness body, and then above that 2 more, which are the Vijnanamaya, which is described wrongly today as intelligence. It's actually the supramental consciousness, the divine intelligence, the divine creative power that we spoke of before. And then the 5th body is the Anandamaya, the bliss body. Again, wrongly described today and reduced to a sensory, sensational happiness or such. It is something much more fundamental. And Sri Aurobindo observes the last two are not yet organized in us. They exist as planes of consciousness. That is the domain of Satchidananda, not yet organized and individualized as bodies. And therefore, we are unable to be conscious on those levels, although those levels exist and a part of us is there. We are there. We are more truly there. We are truly divine beings. But because those levels are not organized and integrated, we are unable to be conscious, but we can enter those states in a state of samadhi where we are unconscious to the world. But when these bodies are sufficiently formed and developed and integrated, we will simultaneously live on all these planes at the same time. Why 5 bodies? Well, for this reason again. The 5th is the Satchidananda itself, and so the 7 is as if reduced to 5 because that is a single body. But I'm coming to this because this is very important for us to understand. The relationship of the 5 bodies actually maps to the 5 elemental states. Because it is the earth element which predominates in our gross physical body. It is the water element which predominates in the life force body. It is the fire element which predominates in the mental body, and so on. But you notice in the vocabulary of yoga, the words themselves are so precise. The words articulate, just as we spoke earlier about the B and the Bh and the Brahman, etc. The words are always rooted in a creative principle or power. The language itself is an expression of a deeper truth. So in the physical body is called Annamaya. Anna is food. So food body. What does that really mean? Why is it called food body? And Sri Aurobindo explains this. He says, in the physical world, unlike other worlds, and this is the distinctive characteristic of the physical. You see, every world has sense of forms. Every world has sense of all kinds of experiences and the 5 senses. Always you name an object by its distinctive character, isn't it? So what is distinctive to the physical world? Interestingly, in this world, everything is food for something else. Everything ends up having to eat something else in order to survive. And so the symbol given in some of the traditions is the snake eating its own tail. And the food cycle, where everything ends up eating something else, eventually comes back to you and goes back all the way to everything else. And that's interesting, and it's characteristic of the physical world. If anything stops this food cycle, disengages from it, it dies. It simply ceases to be. It breaks down and becomes food for something else. So either you participate in the food cycle or you break down and are absorbed by the food cycle to be recast into a different form where you're again pulled into the food cycle. You don't have a choice. So it is the world of Annam, food. So when they said Annam Brahman is one of the great statements, every world is an expression of the Brahman, is divine, including the material world is divine. Unfortunately, people tend to reduce it to food is divine. Yes, of course, that is an implicit implication of this, but it is meant in a much more broad sense, all matter. Predominantly of the 5th elemental principle dominating across all other 4, the other 4 also being present, all matter is equally divine because it is the same one divine consciousness which has become this. To our appearance, to our existence, as if separate, individualized, fragmented pieces, but underlying it you will find the oneness, and the means to discover the oneness is observing the food cycle. I'll put it in this way. You, as physical body, cannot exist unless you take in a little bit of the plant. The plant itself cannot exist unless it takes it a little bit of the rock. The rock itself cannot exist unless it takes its energy from somewhere else. And so what you see underlying is this continuity of energetic flow, of substance flow, and behind both, that which guides the flow is the consciousness flow. So when modern science begins to observe this material process, it goes deeper and deeper until at some point the distinctiveness of form begins to break down. You have the fluidity of form, and we approach actually the water principle at that point. In the subatomic particles below electron, proton, neutron, everything is fluid. Everything is transitioning from one point to another, one state to another, or even interacting underlying the atom in a way that you cannot say what is where. For example, right now, according to our current physics, a single electron from an atom on the tip of my finger, for example, is jumping around across atoms, not only through my finger, jumping into the air, going into the ground and jumping around, bouncing atom to atom, going through your body right now, going through your brain and through your little toe and through your hair and bouncing around and perhaps eventually coming back into some other atom in my own body. Are we really that separate? If at this very moment all the electrons of all our atoms are actually being shared, jumping around, think about it. And if the underlying atom itself and the particles are made of an energy that is flowing, observe the electron itself, energy flows in, rhythms flows out, and another flows in, rhythms flows out, and like the river with the hump, you see the hump and say this is electron when actually it's a river flowing. This is proton when actually river of energy flowing. This is neutron, river of energy flowing. You go down one level below to muons and other subatomic particles, a zoo of more than 300 particles. They are all constantly splitting, breaking, rejoining in a dance. There you see the real flow, but still you are sticking to form, not recognizing the underlying flow. All is energy. But when science comes to this discovery, and we have now formulae to describe the working of energy, E equals mc square. Ah, yes, why not mc cube? I don't know, that's how it is, that's what I observe. All of your physics is nothing but observation of this flow of energy. And the flow of energy is bound as if largely, loosely, to the formula that describes it. But when you ask why this, we don't know. In other words, science explains nothing. It only describes what it observes and generalizes what it observes and declares its observations as law. But from the yogic perspective, because all is the one divine consciousness utterly free and playing out its freedom, what you're describing as law is nothing but rhythms and habits of nature. Shakti working. Para or apara, irrelevant, but is the flow of nature and the way she chooses to rhythm out across the whole eternity and infinity. Because you see it common, you say law. There is no law. There is only free play of energy, forming herself, expressing herself innumerably. Now, when we come to this point of the energy flow, the physics says it's all energy. What makes the energy flow in this way? We don't know. And it stops short. But the yogic science goes further and says the energy is guided or is an expression of the consciousness and the intention in the consciousness. And here we come to the more complete science of yoga. Consciousness directs energy. Energy flowing, rhythming and repetition becomes appearance of stable form, and the 5 elemental processes by which you have the rigidity of the appearance of the world. And therefore the 5 bodies which represent these 3, physical anna, pranamaya which is the energy flow, and the consciousness. But this consciousness is not yet the total consciousness. Behind that is the vijnanamaya, which is the true consciousness, of which mind is a reduced representation. But when you enter increasingly the true consciousness, you are able to modify the energy flow. And by modifying energy flow, change form. This becomes natural to the state of the creative consciousness because it is the same creative power which formed the universe, which is what you are now identified with, and you become a participant in this creation. This is our destiny. This is the direction of our evolution, to awaken to our own divinity and become conscious participants as centers of the divine consciousness, expressing freely the divine freedom and manifesting and creating freely the divine beauty to express the divine bliss. If that was the original creative movement in which the cosmos was expressed, we individual souls are now entering this creative movement to recover our divinity and now become co-creators in the modern vocabulary. and participants in this divine blissful play. And therefore, we have 5 bodies. And so now the sense of 5 has a deep significance, perhaps, in which we see also our sense of purpose in life. And the more we become aligned to our deeper, truer ranges of consciousness, the more we become conscious participants, creating, expressing, manifesting. What is for us today supernatural or magical or supernormal would become natural to a consciousness which is increasingly more and more liberated as divine beings. So I think with this, I will pause what I have to say.